So yesterday I completed the purchase of my first house in the UK, and in this video I'm going to describe the costs that were involved in that process. Let's get started. If we take a step back, right, how can you actually buy a house in the UK? In the most simplest form, there are two ways you can buy a house in the UK: via cash or via a mortgage. When it comes to cash, if the house costs 520k and you have 520k cash in your account, you can pay for that house outright, like that, meaning there is no mortgage. Now, for most people, they will buy a house with a mortgage. And a mortgage is simply a loan given to you by the bank to buy the house. And that loan is secured with the property you are buying. It's literally that simple, right? Now, in my case, I used a mortgage to buy my house. What was the first step in that process? The first step in that process was for me to first of all know how much they actually have for a deposit. Second step was to try and find out what was the max the bank would allow me to borrow. And the max the bank will allow you to borrow would be based on your income and the debt you have and a few other factors, but mostly it's based on your income and your debt, right? The bank wants to be able to know you can meet the monthly repayment required. In my case, the bank would have allowed me to borrow up to 580k. That's the max amount I could borrow. And how did I actually find what that max amount was? I employed a mortgage broker. And a mortgage broker will allow you to get a decision in principle. Because more times than not, when you're viewing houses, estate agents will ask you, do you have a mortgage in principle? Which more or less tells the agent that you can afford the property you're trying to look at. So for me, early on, I got a mortgage broker. I knew the max amount I could borrow. I knew what my deposit was. Now I have to think logically, what's the house I can actually get, right, with my money? Ultimately, if I wanted to, I could push for a 650k house, right? But what? The house I ended up buying cost me 520 grand. My deposit was 78 grand because as a foreign national, I had to have a 15% loan to value. And more or less loan to value is basically saying the house cost 520 grand, your deposit is 15% of that house price, and you're going to borrow the rest as a mortgage. So in my case, house price 520 grand, deposit 78 grand, and mortgage is 442 grand, which is a lot lower than what I could borrow, right? That's how much lower. That is 138k lower than what I could borrow. And I'll explain to you why I did it this way later on in the video. Now let's assume I actually tried to borrow a lot more from the bank, right? Because I'm a foreign national, I had to keep at least a 15% loan to value ratio. So let's assume the house price was 650 grand. Loan to value wise, my deposit would have to be 97 grand and my mortgage would end up being 552 grand. What does this mean, right? This I can afford, technically, right? But I'd have had to put in an extra more or less 20 grand for my deposit, and my monthly payments would definitely be a lot higher because I'm borrowing a lot more. Now, you have to ask yourself a question, right? Is there any difference in utility from a house that would cost 520 grand versus 650? I would argue there'll be no difference in how happy, in quotes, that house makes me feel. So what's the point? And for me, 520k was enough to get that. So why would I try and contribute an extra 20 grand just for the deposit? Also, let's look into the other costs involved in buying a house. So for my house, the stamp duty was 16 grand. And to calculate this, you literally go on the government website, you put in the price, first time buyer, it's more or less spit out 16 grand. And the legal costs were around 2 grand. And the bank application cost, so when you're applying for a mortgage, more times than not, you pay the bank around 900 to 1 grand. In my case, it was 1 grand. So the total cost, apart from the deposit, was 19.8 grand. And for proof, you can see this is a screenshot from my lawyer, and you can see total cost here is 18.8 because this does not include the bank's application fee. So literally, it's not me making shit up. This was what I paid, right? This is the total cost. So let's compare that to if I went ahead with a house that cost me 650k. Stamp duty will go up. It's now be 22.5 grand, and the legal cost will stay the same, and the bank application cost will stay the same. So more or less, I'll be paying again an extra 6.5 grand out of pocket. So if we compare the two house prices, right? 520 what I got versus 650 which I could get. I'd have had to pay an extra 26 grand in cash, 90.5 grand more for deposit and 6.5 grand more for other costs, right? And again, I'm showing these examples to show that just because the bank can borrow 580 grand doesn't mean you should actually take 580 grand, right? I only took 442 grand. And again, you have to understand that at this point in my life, I'm paying for a wedding. Obviously, I'm going to buy the house. I need cash right now, right? I need to be very liquid in the near term, right? There's a lot of stuff I need to pay for right now, which also made it very clear to me that I shouldn't try and buy a more expensive house, right? And I think when you compare the two, 97 grand was the total cost to buy this house, excluding like minor stuff, versus 123 grand, 26 grand difference. I think I made the right choice, right? But yeah, I hope that was very clear. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.